What if I told you a forgotten passport created one of rock's greatest partnerships? 20 million records sold, arena tours that rivaled Kiss. Then their genius walked out mumbling, "Poor, poor rock bottom," just as stardom arrived. A frontman who threw punches instead of compliments. A bassist so wild even Ozzy Osbourne couldn't keep up. And a legendary Beatles producer who regretted ever meeting them. This is the rise and fall of UFO. London, 1968. The psychedelic era was burning itself out, and three working-class musicians were trying to find their place in the wreckage. Phil Mogg, Pete Way, and Andy Parker had started as a band called Hocus Pocus, but they needed something bigger, something that captured the experimental spirit of the underground scene they'd grown up in. They chose UFO, not as a tribute to flying saucers, but as a respectful nod to the legendary UFO Club in London. It was the epicenter of London's psychedelic revolution, where bands like Pink Floyd defined the underground. By taking that name, these three young men were anchoring themselves to something specific, a moment when working-class grit collided with cosmic ambition. But ambition doesn't always translate to success. Their early albums, UFO 1 in 1970 and UFO 2 in 1971, were exercises in space rock indulgence. Long, meandering jams, experimental boogie that lacked focus. The UK didn't care, America didn't notice. But something unexpected happened. Japan and Germany fell in love with them. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This wasn't the path they'd imagined, but it was a lifeline. They toured Tokyo and recorded a live album there in 1971 that gave them their first taste of what they could become on stage. The studio might not capture their power, but put them in front of a crowd, and something electric happened. That live album from Tokyo even cracked the top 30 in Germany, proving they had an audience, just not in their own backyard. The problem was the guitar. Mick Bolton had provided the bluesy textures on those first albums, but his style was increasingly wrong for where Mogg and Way wanted to go. They needed something heavier, sharper, more aggressive. Bolton left. They tried Larry Wallace. Then Bernie Marsden. Each guitarist brought something different, but none of them provided the spark that would transform UFO from a cult act into something legendary. The band was stuck in limbo, talented enough to survive, but not distinctive enough to break through. For 3 years, they searched for the missing element that would elevate them from competent to extraordinary, never imagining it would arrive because of a forgotten passport. Germany, 1973. UFO was headlining a tour with a young opening act called The Scorpions. Then disaster struck. Guitarist Bernie Marsden had forgotten his passport back in London. No passport meant no show. Cancellation seemed inevitable. In desperation, UFO looked to their opening act. The Scorpions had an 18-year-old lead guitarist named Michael Schenker. Could he fill in? Just for one night. What happened next became rock and roll legend. Schenker spoke no English. The band spoke no German. But when he plugged in that white Gibson Flying V and started playing, language became irrelevant. The communication was absolute. The precision was surgical. The melody was transcendent. This wasn't just a competent fill-in. This was the missing piece UFO had been searching for since their inception. Mogg and Way made their move immediately. They convinced Schenker to leave the Scorpions and join UFO permanently. It was a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of British hard rock. But Michael Schenker heard something in UFO that others didn't. He heard potential. He heard a band that would give him the freedom to explore his melodic sensibilities in ways the Scorpions' more rigid Germanic approach wouldn't allow.
Doctor, doctor, please!
In 1974, with Schenker now firmly in the lineup, UFO recorded Phenomenon with producer Leo Lyons of 10 Years After. The space rock experiments were over. What emerged was something leaner, meaner, and infinitely more dangerous. A no-fuss hard rock style that combined melody with muscle. The album gave them Dr. Doctor, a track about romantic paranoia that became their calling card. The riff was immediate and unforgettable. The solo was a masterclass in melodic construction. But the real revelation was Rock Bottom, an epic that would become the primary vehicle for Schenker's improvisational genius for years to come. The song started as a relatively concise studio track, but on stage, it transformed into something else entirely. Schenker would stretch it to 10, 12, sometimes 15 minutes, using the song's structure as a launching pad for explorations that left audiences speechless. The album only reached number 202 in the US, but it signaled something crucial. UFO had entered the American market, and they were just getting started. More importantly, they'd found their identity. The sound was locked in. The chemistry was undeniable. Everything pointed toward breakthrough. Between 1975 and 1978, UFO became one of the most respected hard rock bands in the world. The classic lineup, Mogg, Schenker, Way, Parker, and eventually keyboardist Paul Raymond, refined their sound across 5 definitive albums that sold over 20 million records worldwide. Force It in 1975 delivered tracks like Shoot Shoot and Let It Roll that became staples of FM radio. No Heavy Petting in 1976 introduced keyboards through Danny Peronell, expanding their sonic palette. The American tours became increasingly ambitious. They were opening for Kiss and Jethro Tull, but audiences were leaving the venues talking about UFO. The word was spreading through the underground. There was a British band with a German guitarist that was absolutely devastating live. No gimmicks, no theatrics, just 4 men and their instruments creating something undeniable.
Lights out in London.
Then came 1977's Lights Out. Produced by Ron Nevison, who'd worked on Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, the album was their creative crescendo. The title track became an anthem of urban paranoia, with a riff so heavy it felt like the city itself was collapsing. But it was the power ballad Love to Love that demonstrated their true sophistication. Swirling strings, cascading guitar solos, a level of musical light and shade that few of their peers could match. Paul Raymond's addition to the lineup in 1977 proved to be the final puzzle piece. His ability to switch seamlessly between rhythm guitar and keyboards allowed the band to replicate their increasingly complex studio arrangements in a live setting. Now, Schenker had the harmonic support he needed to truly soar, and the band had the textural depth to compete with anyone. The album reached number 23 on the Billboard 200. For the audience of the late 70s, UFO represented something essential, a working man's rock band. Spandex-clad, hard-living, but musically untouchable. 1978's Obsession maintained that momentum, peaking at number 41 with classics like Only You Can Rock Me and Cherry. Despite the modest chart position compared to Lights Out, the album showcased a band hitting their creative stride. The songs were tighter, the performances more confident. They'd evolved from promising upstarts to seasoned professionals who understood exactly what they were doing. They had arena tours across America. They had the respect of their peers and the devotion of their fans. Appearances on shows like Don Kirshner's rock concert brought them into living rooms across the country. Their image, leather, spandex, and that unmistakable flying V, burning itself into the consciousness of a generation. They were on the verge of stadium-level stardom, the kind of success that separates the contenders from the legends. But success without stability is just a house built on sand, and the foundation was already cracking. Behind the scenes of their commercial ascent was a band in constant friction. The primary conflict was the volatile relationship between Phil Mogg and Michael Schenker, 2 men who couldn't have been more different. Mogg was the quintessential tough guy frontman. A Londoner with a caustic wit and a background in boxing, he ruled the band with a combination of charisma and intimidation. He used relentless mockery as a way of keeping control. Schenker was his opposite, a sensitive, often reclusive wunderkind who suffered from crippling stage fright. He struggled with the pressures of rising celebrity. He relied heavily on antidepressants just to cope with touring, and Mogg's constant mockery cut him deeper than anyone realized. The physical altercations became legendary. Mogg later clarified that while he didn't literally shut Schenker's head in a door as rumored, the distinction he made was chilling. His shoves were loving gestures compared to his punches. Every rehearsal and backstage moment was a potential minefield. Schenker never knew when Mogg's banter would turn cruel. Compounding the interpersonal friction was the band's legendary substance abuse. Bassist Pete Way was in a different league entirely. Even Ozzy Osbourne, a man not known for restraint, noted that Way was beyond comprehension. Way's lifestyle was chaotic. The excess wasn't just recreational, It was pathological, a self-destructive spiral that he seemed unable or unwilling to stop. Sharon Osbourne eventually banned Ozzy from hanging out with UFO, deciding even for Ozzy their world was too dangerous. While this hell-raising image enhanced their rock and roll mystique, the outlaw band that lived harder than anyone else, it eroded the professional discipline necessary to sustain their success. Recording sessions became unpredictable. Tour dates became questionable. The machine was working, but barely, held together by willpower and the sheer force of their musical chemistry. They were a powder keg, and everyone could feel the fuse burning down. The question wasn't if they would explode, it was when and how much damage it would cause. In late 1978, UFO recorded several shows in Chicago and Louisville for their first double live album. Strangers in the Night was intended to be their definitive statement, proof that they were Led Zeppelin without the pretension, a band at the absolute height of their powers. Released in early 1979, the album is universally regarded as one of the greatest concert documents in rock history. It captured everything that made UFO special, the definitive versions of Rock Bottom, Doctor Doctor, and Lights Out, all in one package. The performances were incendiary. Schenker's solos were transcendent. The rhythm section locked in with freight train precision. The album reached number 7 in the UK and number 42 in the US. Behind the scenes, though, the recording process revealed the fragility of the operation. A couple of tracks were actually studio recordings with crowd noise added, a common practice that reflected the perfectionism pushing the band to breaking point. They were positioned for their final push into stadium-level stardom. Everything was aligned. The album was a masterpiece. The tours were selling out. The moment had arrived, and that's when Michael Schenker walked away. During the mixing sessions at the record plant in New York, the tension between Schenker and producer Ron Nevison reached a breaking point. Schenker was deeply unhappy with certain guitar takes on Rock Bottom. He believed there were wrong notes, mistakes that would haunt him every time the album was played. He wanted to re-record the parts. He needed to fix what he heard as imperfections. Nevison refused. To him, the performance was already brilliant, and Schenker's mistakes were inaudible to anyone else. The argument escalated. Finally, Schenker stood up, mumbled, "Poor, poor Rock Bottom," and walked out of the studio. He disappeared from the band for many years. The ship had lost its primary navigator just as it was entering port. The tragedy wasn't just that Schenker left. It was the timing. 5 albums, a legendary live record. The American audience was theirs for the taking, and the man whose guitar had built this empire couldn't stand to be part of it anymore. Years of stage fright, medication, and tension with Moog finally caught up with Schenker. He decided the price of success was too high. Following Schenker's exit, UFO rehired guitarist Paul Chapman and sought to reinvent themselves. Chapman was a live wire, a reliable performer who brought a more blue-collar British hard rock sensibility to replace Schenker's precision. In a move that demonstrated their continued industry stature, they secured the services of George Martin, the legendary Beatles producer, for their 1980 album, No Place to Run. George Martin was the embodiment of upper-crust British civility, keeping a strict and orderly studio schedule. He brought the same disciplined, sophisticated approach that had shaped the Beatles. UFO were British hellraisers who wanted to ratchet up the volume to levels that threatened the studio's roof. They were, in Martin's words, stupid kids who simply didn't fit into his world. The contrast was almost comical. Martin water skiing in the afternoon before his civilized cocktail hour, while Moog and Way were looking for the nearest bar to continue their tour of excess. The recording sessions became a battle of wills. Martin wanted clean, controlled performances. UFO wanted grit and power. The final product was professional, polished, but it lacked the raw energy that had defined their best work. Martin had tamed them, and in doing so, he'd removed the very element that made them special. Martin later stated that he regretted very much his flirtation with heavy metal, feeling the music didn't seem to have any sense. For a band that had just lost their musical genius and was desperately trying to maintain momentum, having your producer express regret was a devastating blow. It was a public declaration that even one of music's most respected figures couldn't find value in what they were doing. While No Place to Run performed well in the UK, Reaching number 11, it failed to match the international momentum of its predecessors. The 1980s brought a series of lineup changes and a shift toward a lighter, more pop-oriented sound on albums like The Wild, The Willing, and The Innocent and Mechanics that alienated their core audience. Pete Way's departure in 1982 was a devastating blow. Without him, something essential was missing. By 1983, the band had collapsed entirely, disbanding after the commercial failure of Making Contact. The dream that had begun in the London Underground 15 years earlier was over. Despite the fragmentation and decline, UFO's legacy was already cemented. Their influence on the next generation wasn't just significant, it was foundational. Steve Harris of Iron Maiden has cited UFO as a primary influence, especially their dynamic arrangements. The way UFO could shift from crushing heaviness to melodic beauty within a single song became the blueprint for everything Iron Maiden would achieve. James Hetfield of Metallica chose the Flying V guitar specifically because of Michael Schenker. The band's no-fuss approach to heavy music paved the way for the new wave of British heavy metal, and influenced acts as diverse as Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, and Slayer. The 1991 reunion album Walk on Water briefly recaptured the magic, but Schenker's habit of walking off mid-set plagued the tour and led to his permanent exit. The pattern repeated itself, Brilliance undermined by instability. In their final years, UFO remained a respected legacy act. They continued to tour and record 22 studio albums in total, with Phil Mogg as the only constant member. In 2018, Mogg announced his retirement. The Last Orders tour was meant to be a grand farewell, a chance for the fans who had followed them for decades to say goodbye. But a 2022 heart attack brought the tour to an abrupt halt. In 2024, Mogg confirmed what everyone already knew. The band was finished. Phil Mogg, now in his late 70s, reflects on the band's history with what observers call a near Zen-like acceptance. Despite the physical altercations, the tankers of booze, the many missed opportunities for global domination, he expresses genuine happiness with the band's contribution to the genre. They may have flown too close to the sun, but they did so with a level of vigor and strut that remains unmatched. UFO proved that brilliance and stability don't always coexist. 5 classic albums, over 20 million records sold, an influence that shaped an entire genre. But they couldn't hold together when it mattered most. The very volatility that fueled their creative fire was the same force that ensured their fragmentation. For those who remember the arenas, the Flying V, and that unmistakable sound, UFO remains what they always were. Strangers in the night who left an indelible mark on the soul of rock and roll. What's your UFO memory? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories of rock's greatest triumphs and tragedies.